Today's guest believes that people are at the heart of every successful transformation, and that skipping over change management is one of the fastest ways to stall your growth.
7 out of 10 transformation programs will fail, and usually 2/3 of them are failing because of a people or an organizational related issue. If your people are not bought into how that's going to work, then your effort might, it could just completely fail. I mean, the technology part is easy. Getting your people and your organization to adapt to it, that's the hard part. As you're building the solution, change management should be at the table.
Today, I am joined by Scott Sheinbaum, and he is the founder of Anthros Partners and has spent 25 years helping companies scale smarter by getting their teams aligned before change gets underway. And today, we're talking about change management. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Chelsey. Thanks for having me. It's a exciting time. Change management, December.
Everybody's getting their little changes ready.
That's it. That's right. Holiday time of year, change management.
You've said before that people are at the heart of successful change. What does that mean for your line of work?
So first, thanks for having me on the podcast. I think, for the way I kind of look at this is like, you can intend to have any implementation that you want. You can have a major transformation. You can have a change in an operating model. At the end of the day, if your people are not bought into how that's going to work, then your effort might be for naught. It could just completely fail. I mean, we've seen that over and over again. But you also will get, not seeing the value of really what was sold to you when you were buying the advisement that you received. And I think you get to a point where your staff and your organization just can get really frustrated, right? Painfully frustrated. Like, I've been to this rodeo once before, and I've heard all these promises and things don't come to fruition the way it was. And that's bad for the folks who are selling that product or service. It's bad for the leader who's trying to implement it. So I really think that when it comes down to it, any transformation, even an AI transformation, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit, has to be with people at the heart of it, an organization at the heart of it.
Can we talk about a few examples of a transformation? Just like throw out a few that you've been a part of or you heard of so we can picture them in our minds when we go through this convo?
Yes, certainly. So the type of work that I've tended to do in my career has either been around ERP transformation. So you're putting in an SAP, you're putting in Oracle, you're putting in Workday or SuccessFactors or one of these big package implementations to try to help the organization get well aligned. Another type of example might be a managed services project where you say, hey, you know what? This provider of services is better than we are at doing this. And maybe they can do, our mess for less a little bit, right?
Mhm.
They can take over that service and it's almost like you're leasing it back from them. And you, as the organization who is going to contract with somebody who's providing those services, you're kind of leasing that service back and you can invest in your core competency. So take a company like Levi's, for example. Levi's, hopefully at their core, wants to be the coolest Americana brand around jeans and apparel.
Mhm.
They're probably not that interested in operating IT in an office in San Francisco. Not to mention, if you're sitting working for Levi's, and I use Levi's as an example, in an IT office in San Francisco, what's the investment really going to be like in new technology in a organization like that? Isn't it better served by a company that, at their heart and soul does that type of work?
Mhm.
So, hey, you know what? I'll hand that off to them. We'll just really focus on making awesome jeans and whatever kids are wearing these days. And we'll focus on, and we'll let somebody else handle the HR. We'll let somebody else handle the finance. Yeah. And organizations are outsourcing everything. That's the reality in some cases. And now with AI, they're botting, and they're agenting things as well. Right. So that's a huge change, though, teaching people from a change perspective. Look, it's not about how something gets done. It's what's getting done. Right. But that's a big mind shift. If you're used to walking down the hallway and having somebody, hey, Chelsey, can you fix my laptop? And I say to you, well, I know I used to fix your laptop. Now you got to log a ticket to do that. What do you mean I have to log a ticket, right? Big change of mindset.
That is. Okay. Why do so many organizations, and I've been a part of it, I've been the problem, why do they get change management wrong or overlook it so often?
Yeah. This is what I think, having seen it. I think, look, first of all, sometimes what ends up happening is an organization thinks they have the skills in sight. And they'll just kind of, it depends on who's supporting the program, right? But the executive leader might say, oh, our people will just adapt,
Mhm.
right? It's kind of like a sign of my dentist that says, maybe it will go away. The 5 most dangerous words in the English language, right? Same type of premise, right? People will just adopt. And that's the reality is not the case. Some people will. Some people will be
Mhm.
early adopters, really will be excited that you're finally implementing a technology or getting them onto a standard platform or changing a process that doesn't work. But naturally, and even change managers, true, people don't like to change. People get comfortable, in their ways of doing things, for one. Two, let's be honest, it's seen as a soft skill, right? It's seen kind of as, oh, the change management folks are going to show up with their Skittles and their rainbows and their funny stories and their anecdotes, but they don't necessarily believe that there's really tangible benefit in that, so that they can actually measure and see the difference. However, you know, God knows how many studies have been conducted, whether it be through ProSci or McKinsey or Deloitte or big firms that will show 7 out of 10, programs will fail, transformation programs will fail. And usually 2/3 of them are failing because of a people or an organizational related issue. So what's my commercial to them, right? You're spending the time. You're definitely spending the money if you're implementing one of these big services or you're going to tell a vendor, go take this over for me. You're spending your people's activity, right? Their mental capacity, because in reality, let's say you're implementing an SAP or an Oracle system. You're not telling those people, oh, by the way, I've hired people in to help implement it. You're going to do this. And by the way, you're going to do your real job too.
Yeah, this is a bonus for you. On top of your day job, you get to do this.
That's right. You get to do this also. That's right. So if you're doing all that, you're spending people's time, effort, and opportunity costs where they could be working on something. My goal as a change manager, I don't want you to just check the box. Oh, we implemented this. Everybody's still looking for every possible workaround. I want them to kind of say, hey, we actually are making a difference. People are adopting to a new way of working. People see the benefit and how this affected their team, hopefully the organization, and probably most important, how this is impacting their own life. Right. But it's easy to kind of, it's also expensive. It's not cheap, right? To have people on the ground and coaching you along the way. So,
It's true.
but
But
I
how
think it's worth it. It's like buying insurance for a car. That's, right? So for each industry, I'll have some kind of, some analogy, right? Yeah.
yeah, if you think of how many, so 2/3, 7 out of 10, like what are the dollar amounts that we're just wasting on
Tremendous.
the time, on good people leaving because they're just fed up with it, like on just canceling the project midway. Oh
Or
man.
I've been on projects where I'm not kidding. Hey, Scott, we're going to do an S4 HANA that's popular right now because they have to move off of SAP ECC. So we're doing S4 HANA implementations, right? Scott, this is our 4th attempt at the implementation. 4th, not
Oof.
second, not okay, we're going to do a re-implementation. 4.0? I mean, come on, guys. If you're at the 4.0, right? It's like, what are you missing? Are your leaders not aligned? Have you not articulated the vision of this? Do you not really understand the impact to the stakeholders? Have you failed to train people? Have you failed to build the value proposition out? Or have you failed once and let that kind of spread like wildfire? Instead of, hey, we acknowledge our failures and things happen and this is what we're going to change about this. Right. So I'm very into the whole, let's capture the voice of the customer, see where we've made that mistake and not have whether it's an implementation or anything, let the people be heard, you know?
Man.
Yeah.
So if you're in the middle of a change management, you're implementing new software, you're changing something big at your company, what are some warning signs that you may have been skipping the human aspect of it?
Yeah. So a few good warning signs, right? First, you walk into the PMO meeting, for example, right? The weekly report, and everything is green,
Mm.
right? And everything on the dashboard is green. You're saying, look, even the most perfect programs, things are not always green. We'll call it the watermelon effect, right? A little bit, right? That if you poke into it, it's all red. But
Uh-huh.
people sometimes are afraid to put that information onto the dashboard for fear that they're going to get called out. Remind me to come back to that because I've got a really funny story about that. So I think that's a huge warning sign for people. If people are just telling people what they want to hear rather than, how it really is. So I think, and that actually, if you want to be have a successful program, you want somebody to give you honest advice, not necessarily what you want to hear. And hopefully you're paying a consulting organization or as a trusted advisor, not just as a consultant. I think another warning sign for sure is, are people showing up and, if you're having communication, are they responding to that communication? Are they asking questions? Are they engaging with whatever materials you're putting out? Are people showing up and excited about, do they want to be change champions for
Mm.
your program? Or do they see whatever you're trying to do here as a burden, right? Here's another initiative that the company is making me do. And look, there used to be a time early in my career where an organization would take on a change initiative. Okay, we're going to go implement a software. We're going to change a process. And that was the thing they did for the year or for a couple of years, right? That was
Uh-huh.
the change. Now, you go into organizations, you might have dozen changes happening at once. So your staff is mentally exhausted. Your leaders are going in all sorts of different directions. You're trying to infuse AI into this. There's a tremendous amount of change fatigue in your own people. And then there's a little bit of resentment in that too. So, I think constantly taking the pulse a little bit of the organization is really critical.
Mm. I come from a sales background,
Yeah.
so the way I spend my time is how I get paid. It's
Right.
different than like a project manager. They can show up and do nothing during the day, and they're still going to get a paycheck. A salesperson's not going to get paid unless they sell something. So when you're asked, like, "Hey, we're switching from HubSpot to Salesforce," and I've done this to my sales teams before. That that alone, like, well, where am I putting that in? What am I doing? That slowdown is ugh and draining. I just feel bad that I've made teams do this in the past. I didn't have a Scott come in and help
Well,
us.
I worked for 10 years for IBM,
Mhm.
International Business Machines, right? Amazing place to work. I would recommend any young person to, if they have an opportunity to go work for IBM, because you could work there your whole career and not scratch the surface about what that company does,
Hmm.
right? And I was asked to be part of a sales cadence improvement process.
Okay.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so we start to, and this was a little more operation strategy and operational improvement and some change management. But every week, a report was generated, a sales report was generated. The leads, this and that. That report started as a 16-page report. Like when it was generated in 1991 or something. When we did the analysis on it in 2007, how many pages was that report? That 16-page report.
Ooh. I can't tell if it's been put just into pictures on one page or if it's gonna be like 700 pages.
How about 1,700 pages, the report we put
Oh.
there, right? Because people were what was happening was, people were just saying, "Hey, I need this added. I need this added. I need this added." And no one would ask the most important question in change management. Why? Why do you need to do this? Right? And so all of a sudden we're getting now this report that we're going through, and you find out that people only need 16 or 20 of those pages. But no one's taken the time to actually look at the process that people are going through, wasting, back then paper,
Uh-huh.
or just, files that are just shared around and people going through nonsense, just to, but so often we forget. And there is a book, a Simon Sinek book called Start With Why. And Simon Sinek is, a very big speaker on topics around change management, but just in general, this whole idea that, you know, remind your leaders and remind your staff and your organization when you're doing an initiative, what's the why behind that?
Mm.
Goes a very long way in helping getting people aligned to the vision and understanding why this is an imperative for the organization. One of the biggest facts, like we were putting in a sales implementation type of system. And the sales force has said, this is going to take me 30 minutes to enter in a lead, right? Do you want me spending my time entering in a lead so you can play Big Brother and track my pipeline? Or do you want me out there engaging with clients? Generally, salespeople don't want to do the administrate. That's true.
Yeah.
A whole different culture.
It's a different way of life.
Right.
Managing salespeople after you've done it, you're like, I get it, but I do need to see
Right.
it.
You'll still need to see some pipeline. And then all of a sudden, magically, the numbers come in. It's a whole different ad, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to solve that on this call.
Probably not, but there's time.
Yeah.
When change fatigue sets in, what can they do to prevent their team from burning out, disengaging, and get them back to that why?
Yeah. I think what ends up happening is a lot of times, I think you have to, first of all, make sure that you are very clear as to what the direction and the objectives are here. Again, we would say in IBM, we'd say, go slow to go fast. You don't need to solve every single problem in one swoop, right? Pilot things. Show proof of concept that, hey, this might actually work. Take the pulse of the organization and, ask people their opinions. Hey, is this too much at once? Do we understand how this is affecting you and your team? What can we do? What can we as leaders or what as managers can we do to provide assistance in there? Communicate with people what we know and what we don't know. The solution doesn't have to be perfect. People understand it's okay for a leader or a manager to say, I'm not sure. We're going to figure that out together. And as soon as I know what the thing is, it's okay. As far as, fatigue, try to understand that most people have their full-time job. They're being pulled in to be a subject matter expert. They might be asked to be a change champion. They might have stuff going on in their own personal lives too, beyond their day at work. So trying to balance some of that. And while you have a big organization, that's hard. And you have, shareholders jumping down your throat saying, hey, when is this going to get done? Or I need the cost takeout or this and that. You still need to be able to operate your business well. And you don't want to burn out the most important people because you run that risk of losing the best talent. Because so often in programs, you go back to the well. Hey, Chelsey can be my change champion. She could be my SME. She could be my tester. She can train the people. Well, Chelsey also has a job, right? Maybe we can help clone another Chelsey in the organization. Maybe we could give Chelsey some support here. So I think there's lots of ways to avoid that fatigue.
So New Year's is coming up.
It is.
For those of you listening, this will come out in December, but New Year's is coming up. A lot of folks start the new year and they're not drinking. They're going to the gym 7 days a week. They're eating vegetables every meal. They're overloading change all at once. And then we burn out 2 weeks in versus I'm going to go to the gym 1 day a week for January, 2 days a week in February. Are companies doing the same thing with all of these different initiatives?
My two favorite words in consulting, it depends, right? Good companies are thinking through that, right? Smart, innovative companies are saying, hey, look, can we really look at a calendar and say, these are the activities that are taking up our people's time? And, as much as we would like to do that managed services project in February, let's do it in May because we're going to have better bandwidth. We are going to sequence these activities. We're going to look at how we can incorporate AI into helping our staff augment some of the responsibilities. We recognize that come December 15, we're not going to have a go live date on January 1. How about that, right? I can't tell you how many times I've walked into organizations that have a go live of January 1. Well, you just kind of told your people, hey, guess what? Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate is not that important.
Yep.
Right? And that family time. And you get animosity from your staff too, right? So is something really going to change so drastically that you can't do it on January 20th and let people come back and be refreshed? I don't know. Maybe sometimes legally there is an imperative and people get that, but that shouldn't be your norm, right? So I think starting with a plan, do it in small bits. Don't go and say, hey, we need to solve every single problem at once. Design a program, identify a good pilot, fail, learn from the failings, and tell people, hey, we did this pilot. Here are some things that went really well. Here are some things that I wish we would have done better, and here's how we're going to improve it. And get the voice of those people who were involved. Too many times, I'll give you a great story. I was doing some work for a transit company out in California, and I'm a change manager. I'm going and hearing the voice of the customer. And I go and I'm speaking to the people working in the bus maintenance terminal about their implementing of Oracle. I go set up this focus group and they say, Scott, why aren't you just doing this with the ivory tower? They decided that they wanted to build this. They never asked our opinion about the software. They haven't asked us about the design at all. Let the ivory tower handle it. That's what they call them, the ivory tower, right? Because they're sitting in their corporate office and they know exactly what it takes to maintain a bus.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's the epitome of what change management should not be doing. Right? In good change management, if that person is going to be affected by the software you're putting in, let them have a voice in how it's implemented. Let me understand how your job really works today. Let me see what would work. What configurations can I put into the software to help you help us?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I get that a lot of times on a geo basis too, where, oh, well, the U.S. must understand this, or, this is a U.S. initiative, and yet you're talking to people in other geos and they get the sense that you're, it's like a bully pulpit a little bit.
Like forcing it
down rather than it being a combined, thought through. And I find the most successful ones are the ones where you are really playing off the audience, the collective stakeholders, that being, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a way to do it without slowing it down for 10 years or getting it to say no. There's a way to get input from the different ranks.
Yeah, of course. Why not? I mean, it's not that hard to set up a good focus group and get the right champions involved and have people feel like they're heard, whether that be in a town hall. Hey, my manager is conducting a little town hall here, and feed it back, or set up a meaningful change champion network, which I like to refer to as like senators, but useful, right? They are providing, right, that they're providing information to us in the core team on behalf of their constituents. And we are telling them the updates. And at the beginning, of course, usually like in a good change champion network, maybe early on as the core team, I'm providing information out. And then over time, they're running the thing. They're telling me, hey, look, we just had this town hall in Brazil and it didn't go over well because we always are like we're like a forgotten geo. Note to change team, hey, maybe we should conduct a town hall from another geo. And I see these things work all the time very, very well. People just want to be heard. And change management goes a long way in making that successful.
What role would a middle manager, so you've got the ivory tower, we've got the boots on the ground, what role would sort of a middle manager senator play in change management?
It's a terrible, it's often tough, right, to be the middle manager, because this is what happens. Leader has their vision, and change management is helping the leader make good talking points, right? Make sure that they are staying on script and not going rogue in the elevator. Well, I didn't really agree with that, with this initiative. So hopefully that information comes down to the director level, and then, the staff. The staff usually is the person that, a manager is the person that staff wants to hear information from. We find that over and over again. I don't need it from the CEO of the company. I want it from my manager who I trust, who's in charge of my career, and who may have the best impact on how this is going to shape me. So it requires a manager to try to understand sometimes some of these nuances of how that change might affect his or her team. And in reality, they are often left with, I don't know that detail yet, but when I do, you will know. But they could also recommend people on their respective teams to be subject matter experts who are in the process. They could recommend that person be a change champion. Hey, go represent our team here. And, first of all, it's a great role for somebody to be a rising star, but help us get information on these things, represent our team. A good manager will be an advocate for that initiative and kind of see the benefit of it and not necessarily towing the corporate line, right? I don't want that. I want authentic, but being able to understand how this program can affect them, what may be changing, and what positive impact could come from that change.
You talked about fear earlier. And as we're talking about ivory tower, boots on the ground, and this middle bit, I'm seeing, I'm feeling the fear. Is this a place to talk about that?
Yes, I mean, anytime you have an initiative of some kind, staff in general gets nervous, right?
Mhm.
Well, what's the underlying mission? Is this just about cost saving? Is this going to affect my job? Person's worth. They might have spent 25 years working and developing that legacy system that we're going to replace. Now you're kind of telling me that my skill is not important to you anymore,
Mm.
right? You're telling me that, hey, AI can handle a chat better than I can, cheaper than I can. So there is a whole emotional level of that is fair and fear in people. And again, I think a good manager and a good leader really embraces transparency, empathy, and opportunity for people, right? So a lot of what we're seeing now is real opportunity where, you know, more than ever, we're not just training somebody on necessarily on a task, but we're
Mhm.
really looking at a comprehensive learning opportunity for somebody to become more skilled just in general. I'll use managed services, right? When somebody goes into a managed services relationship and now we're going to go take the IT department and take it away from Levi's, well, the person left in Levi's now has to be learning how to manage a contract, managing an SLA, right? Managing probably things that are more strategic in the business. So for the right people, there could be real career opportunities too.
Mhm.
But fear is reasonable. And a good leader has to be understanding of that. And a good manager has to as well. What you don't want is this. I was working for a big global lighting company, and I did an organizational readiness assessment. We're kind of the voice of the customer, asking people how ready they are for this implementation, this global implementation. And one of the comments more than once came back to me is blank company, I won't mention, is not a safe environment to work in. Now, they weren't referring to like safety, like something's going to fall on their head and hurt them. They were referring to the idea that if they raise an issue, rather than somebody saying, "Hey, thanks for bringing that up," you know, thanks for helping us, and we'll solve that problem together, they're going to get in trouble for raising the issue.
Mm.
So, of course, as a change manager, I raise this to my stakeholder sponsor, and I say to her, "Blind company is not perceived as a safe environment." And her response to me is this: "Scott, I want to know who said that. Who would dare say we're not a safe environment?" And I said, "You do realize," I said,
You're scaring me,
right?
lady.
You do realize that you are making my point exactly here, right?
Yes.
We're a very safe environment. We encourage people to raise things. I say, okay, on the next meeting, what I want you to do is instead, so, when we have those dashboards and everybody's putting in green, let's play own your green. If
Mm.
people put on green so they hopefully, oh, well, if I put all green, no one's going to bother me, right? Own your green. Prove to me that your things are real here. That I'd rather it be yellow and or it's red and here's my path to green. Right? This is the things that we're going to do to make that better. But make people feel safe to be able to say those things. There shouldn't be a fear culture.
I've been doing a little research on fear, just, for fun. 6 out of 10 Americans wake up afraid of losing their jobs. So what it shows up when they're at work is burnout, their anxiety all day. You can't do your best work if you don't have psychological safety.
That's right.
And
So,
it's
you
so
know,
simple.
I look, I've always tried as a manager and a leader to always really provide my team with psychological safety that they know that, if we're on a practice call, that would happen, and kind of that's the rule. What happens on the practice call will stay in the practice call. And
Mhm.
you have a safe space, whether it be with myself or your managers, to share your feelings. I might not agree with you, but that your voice is going to be heard. And I'm going to try to lead from a place of understanding and empathy. And I hope change managers at their core, hopefully we're the best at it, right? We should be Sometimes I joke we're the project therapist, right?
Yeah.
Come and tell me your problem, executive, and I'll tell you how we can handle it, right? Usually a lot of times change managers have leadership coaching certifications
Hmm.
for the same reason, because a good one can engage at the C-suite as well as in the mailroom and recognize that all those stakeholders and every step in between are important.
You talked about it being a soft skill. It is a s something to be able to be in a room and see what everybody's not thinking, but just read between the lines and be able to tie these folks together in a project that's gonna be huge and change everything is not a simple, like
Not as simple.
it's not a simple job.
No.
How do you have certifications and you use a certain method on your website I saw for
Yep.
change management? Tell us a little bit about
Yeah, so
what you
so
do.
right. So a couple things, right? As far as methodology goes, there are things like, for example, ProSci is a standard. ProSci has their ADKAR methodology, which kind of takes people along this change curve, right? Awareness, desire, knowledge, adoption, R, reinforcement. So it's a curve.
Mhm.
Think of it, right? And very rarely, I hate to say it, sadly, we rarely get to the R because you're on to the next thing, but if we can get people along that continuum, it's great. Now, some folks don't subscribe to ProSci, so they're not allowed to use it, right? But the reality is, we want to, in change management, bring people from awareness to adoption. So, whatever the methodology is, to me, the methodology is a way to have a conversation with the customer and get them grounded on the principles. Hey, look, you need to understand who your stakeholders are. You need to understand what the vision is of this program, what the goals and objectives are. How are you going to communicate? What are the impacts to those stakeholders? How ready are those stakeholders? Have you trained them, right? And at the core of that is, again, that journey, taking people along the way. Whatever methodology you use, that's, sometimes I'll walk into a client and they have their own methodology. Great, that's fine. Let's take them from point A to point B along that journey. So I don't get so fixated on the methodology per se. I also think, to some degree, it can act like a menu, right? So you go into some organizations and they are amazing at communications, much better than I am or my peers are. They just have a really buttoned down communications vehicle. Okay, great. Let's utilize the talent within the organization that exists. When we're proposing projects to clients, a lot of times, you'll hear, well, this is going to be a partnership, right? And sometimes it sounds cliche because, you're buying work from a vendor and they're going
Mhm.
to do the work. I'm hoping in change management, it's always a partnership. It should be the epitome of partnership, right? I don't want to do things to your organization, right? Because ultimately I'm going to leave and
Mhm.
you're left with whatever we do. So I want you as a partner in crime. I want you to tell me, hey, Scott, I know that this team is not going to react well to this, or they really like messages that come from so and so. Or do you think you could plan an in-person visit?
Mhm.
Teams is very convenient, or Teams, Zoom, Skype, whatever mechanism that you sit on is very convenient, but it doesn't show somebody sitting in the room and really leaning in and engaging versus, hey, you know what? I'm I'm texting here on my phone and looking at, what's happening in the news. So to be in the room where it happens, to me, is a huge benefit if you can, as a change manager. Start to
Mhm.
read the vibe, feel the body language of people. And so I always encourage, as somebody who's spent 2,200 nights in Marriott, I'm not afraid to get in front of my clients to facilitate and talk to them about and really feel them a little bit.
You got those points.
Right. I got those points. That's right. I got those. They don't go anywhere anymore. They used to go plenty of places, you know?
This might be a sensitive question, but if you're brought in and the goal is, "Hey, we're going to replace this new project is going to lead to a reduction in force." How can you get the job done, keep the people motivated, and feel transparent?
Yeah. It's a tough look. It is a tough situation, right? Because especially, like, not so much, let's say, if you're doing an ERP implementation, but if you're in the, I mean, ERP sometimes certainly, has processes that get aligned, and there's overlap and job redundancy that allows for some cost takeout for sure. But in a managed services environment, a lot of times you're just sending it, you're sending it over to the vendor,
Mm-hmm.
and the vendor might be operating that offshore, and you're key, and maybe the vendor commits to keeping 15% of your staff for a little while, right? So they have that knowledge acquisition. So there's a few things that we do that, can ease some of that. For one, we work with HR and we're working with leaders to make sure that they are retaining their truly most valuable staff. Whether that's incentive programs, whether it's changing their job roles or descriptions, things like that. And for those who might be retained in the organization, we're trying to demonstrate, as I said before, hey, this is an opportunity maybe for you to become more strategic in what we do in the organization. Now, for people who are sometimes let go as a result of these changes, which happens too, hopefully we've consulted HR about how to be equitable and fair, how to position, hey, look, you're still welcome to apply for other opportunities here in the organization. Sometimes legally they have, if you're working in Europe, a workers' council, you're not just cutting somebody off either. But it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy. Sometimes you're helping an organization find those tough spots. I've been pretty fortunate in my career that most of mine have been in a situation where, hey, if you actually add workforce to this area, you might actually substantially increase your productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, today, some of that workforce addition might be coming through an AI, again, through AI or something else. Be empathetic. Don't be always so matter of fact. It's okay people understand that jobs sometimes come and go. I mean, it's not easy if that's all they've known, right? But there is a human side to that to understand and appreciate.
That question of, if you keep your people, but we're implementing this thing over here, you can actually increase your productivity. That's been huge with AI as far as I see. Like,
Definitely.
do you keep all 10 developers and just have those 10 developers rip and be able to do 10x each? Or do you use that opportunity to get rid of 8?
Right.
Like, with AI adoption, how is organizational change management evolving?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of think from a change management perspective, right? You're kind of almost looking at change management now as like almost as an organizational capability rather than, let's say, as, hey, I'm going to go turn on change management for a major initiative, right? So I think also, and I'm seeing almost like a real requirement for a psychological contract, right? Because, leaders need to have emotional intelligence around their people and engage in kind of honest dialogue about, that you maybe sometimes don't always see in traditional change management. So it's not just requiring people to explain, what's changing, but also some intuition around what AI can and can't do. So your change management approach needs to have like almost like a learning infrastructure, not just, oh, I'm training you on something. I also think that a lot of places have, oh, we're going to go do AI, and they try to do everything. Like, try to have some proof of concept. Do some things small that show how, maybe again, you fail fast, right? Hey, this was not a perfect. I mean, there's some things I'm using AI for. I think probably everybody to some degree, it's very helpful at planning travel. But sometimes it's very much a yes man. How do you feel about this? Oh, I think that's a great idea, right? And sometimes you need some of that brutal honesty that a human will provide you as a peer. So, it's not going to resonate well. Now, will AI eventually get there? Maybe. I don't, but I think some of the emotional intelligence still needs to be kind of worked out.
For folks that got really excited about AI, maybe last year, maybe just in 2025, they're like, oh, we're doing it. Did you see a lot of different departments just dabbling or doing their own thing? And now they're like, oh gosh, how do we bring this together and make it a
Yes.
real?
I mean, for sure, like a little bit of going rogue. Hey, let's, everybody, one is one is trying chatbots, one is trying to, do recruiting, one is trying to do set up agents. And part of that, I think, is really understanding within the organization, how do you keep momentum for it, but recognize that some parts of the business are going to be like, and I'll use supply chain, right, as a good example, a good segue here. Supply chain with AI alone is not going to work. You need to have some of that human interaction to make somebody decide, hey, where some of those interdependencies are outside of your own organization, right? So, you might be trying to fix a problem with your own warehouse, but if you're not engaged on the receiving end of that or the transportation, all you might have caused is more organizational chaos. So getting people on the same page, again, having an AI strategy and thinking that, hey, look, this is a big change for people. And we have to understand who the stakeholders are, how we're going to communicate these things, what the impact is, how ready the organization is all kind of makes, I think, change management more and more valuable and important.
You and I met through a supply chain
We did.
group of cool kids. And
cool kids.
they've got, if you're doing work in the industry, the data is everywhere. Things are named differently. The same thing, bobtail, could be called power unit, the same thing could be called 5 different things across the industry just in this country. So when you're trying to connect systems or put AI on top of your current system without first taking that step and talking to all the stakeholders, and I've worked for 2 AI solutions in supply chain and they did not work.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, you could see the benefit of it, but you can't make a statement like, oh, we need better forecasting accuracy, and here's how an AI model is helping, right? You need to still be able to apply judgment. And, here's how we with AI can learn things better together. And instead of trying to transform something really overnight, maybe you start with one product or one category or one region, and then get an enthusiastic champion around those ideas, right? But, I think the change management, especially in things like supply chain, maybe almost needs to create like a safe space for learning and iteration, right? And, because people won't adopt new approaches if a single mistake becomes a crisis to management.
Yep.
And I think trust is, a real concern. Imagine working in a warehouse and all of a sudden, you've used your judgment for the last 18 years about what needs to happen to get those product out on time or staffed or brought in. And now you're coming in, an executive comes in and says, oh, you know what? We're going to let an AI do that for you. Really?
Not with you.
Not with you. Right. Look, and the warehouse, getting those people who are working on those things, right, to adopt, you can have the most sophisticated demand forecasting, the most elegant inventory organization. But if your planner doesn't trust the system recommendations, they're going to override it anyway. Or if your warehouse manager is used to working off a spreadsheet, that's what he or she is going to do, right? So some of those interdependencies, I think, fail not because the technology is not working, but because the people didn't change how they work. And again, in a supply chain, as the nature of the business, it ripples across multiple, facets of the business, your suppliers, logistics partners, customers, internal functions.
Yes.
So it's an ecosystem of change management. It'll keep us busy for a while, I'm hoping, right? So
at the beginning of the call, or somewhere in the middle, said that change management should kind of be in every organization always, not just something you bring in.
I'm a big believer in that.
How does a company go about doing that?
Yeah. So look, for one thing that I pride myself even with Anthros is that, I say it I want to educate people on change management. I don't want transactional relationships with clients. And when I was working with, big corporations, I kind of felt the same way. I want them to have people that identify, hey, look, we understand what we mean by a stakeholder. When we define a stakeholder, we know what it means to have a vision statement or capture an impact, of, what that really means. In the future, I am going to use SAP. Today I use a legacy system. This change impacts how I input data. This, to get ready for this, this is what I need to do. Kind of that change management recipe, that impact recipe card. Understanding the readiness of those different stakeholders. All these aspects that kind of, I think it's easy enough for an organization to, maybe they don't want to have a full blown, hey, we're going to have a change management department. But the same way you're skilling people in AI or skilling people in using Microsoft Office, skill some people in change management or in your organization that can be your genuine champions.
Mhm.
So often what happens is, I always ask for a liaison into the organization, and the organization is kind of like, so Scott, do I need somebody from comms? Do I need somebody from HR? Do I need somebody from, like, where should I start in your liaison here? And the best answer would be, hey, give me your person who's your, your change management leader, right? Somebody
Yeah.
who looks across different initiatives and is helping to drive culture, and, maybe the person's in organizational design.
Mhm.
But don't write it off as, oh, that's it's not that important to our core. It's very important to your core.
For a smaller company, could they engage with a change management professional? I'm like, what do you call yourself? A change management professional on like a fractional basis so that you can always come in and help them spot before they make big decisions?
For sure. I mean, look, not every project is a multi-million dollar, multi-year project, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes a client just needs some advisement, needs some tools and templates. I'm not a huge fan of the old go provide a tool and template, only because they might not, it's like asking me to go watch a YouTube video to go fix my dryer. It's
Mm.
probably not going to go all that well. I could watch the video. I'm probably going to still not follow that video all that well, but I might be able to do better than without the video. The only way to really learn it is to do it a little bit. So, like I said, but you certainly can have primers with the client and spend some
Mhm.
time and try to get at what their salient, their big issue, excuse me, what are their big burning platform issues that they're trying to work through. And again, maybe they have some talent that we can help augment. So I don't, sounds cliche, but I don't think a change management program is too big or too small to work out some kind of a working relationship to support that client.
If someone's listening and they're thinking, "Oh, I wish I'd heard this, 6 months ago." Is there anything they can do to get back on track?
Definitely. Well, it's so funny using a track analogy here. I always tell clients, right? To be fair, right? I grew up in the Northeast. I'd say, look, if you're on the project train and the train is going from Boston to Miami, change management I don't want to board the train in Raleigh, where I live,
Mhm.
right? Because I have missed all the passengers who've gotten on the train. I've missed the baby who's screaming, and so I can move my seat. I've missed the lousy food that they're serving, and so I'm left with just something at the snack bar. I want to be on the train starting up in Boston. I want to be the first one on the train. I want to choose my seat if I can,
Mm.
right? Literally, I want to choose my seat because I want to see who's in the room, how people are behaving. Are they interested in looking out the window? Or are they really engaging in what's going on? Are they talking to the conductor as they walk down the hall, right? Do they have their ticket ready to go, or are they fumbling for things? Because being
Mhm.
in that room where it happens, again, Hamilton, right, is, I think, very, very important for the change manager. Now, sometimes, oh, we'll do it ourselves. And I get that, oh shit call. Scott, we need some help. We need some change rescue, as we'll call it. So we are either going to, get hyper focused on some very specific activities with the client. Hey, we're going to help you with some go live communication. We're going to do a quick and dirty impact assessment and readiness assessment here for you. We're going to make sure the training is going to meet your needs. And we might recommend with your team, let's do an MVP or a minimum viable product. Let's launch just the basics right now, not try to have every single thing come out,
Mhm.
show proof of concept, and then, 2 months later, we'll release the rest. Again, but getting back to that whole go slow to go fast, show some proof to your employees. Hey, we had those quick wins. We demonstrated them. We championed them. We shared all that stuff. So is it ever too late? The effectiveness of change management is obviously going to decrease over getting on the train. But there's certainly stuff you can do if you're late to the game. More important to your listeners here is, as you're building the solution, change management should be at the table.
Mm.
You don't have to buy a Maserati if you just need a Toyota, but don't be showing up with a bicycle if you know you're going to be on the highway. Create an environment that change management can be successful, and then bring your own people to help be advocates. Find the right champions that are not voluntold, but they're volunteers. They're excited about the change, and they want to be advocates for you. I don't need them singing Kumbaya and saying, oh, this is the greatest thing, but be honest reflectors of what that change is going to be.
As folks are heading into the new year and they might have aggressive ideas already, like, in January, do you have any nuggets that they should consider come January 1 for change management?
Great question. Look, the nice thing about the calendar, we get this little break and you get a mental reset. I think that as you're thinking through, if your fiscal year is January to December calendar, and you're starting to do your account planning and you're thinking about what your targets are and your initiatives are, remember those things are successful as a result of your people and the organization that supports them. Even if you're looking at AI opportunities and augmenting and reducing some of your headcount in doing some of that activity. A lot of times when I'll go up and I'll present to clients, usually what ends up happening is my technology colleagues will go and present the technology solution. I'm supposed to get 15 minutes at the end. I get 3, right? Because they're running over talking about technology stuff. And I joke about it and I say, look, the technology part is easy. Getting your people in your organization to adapt to it, that's the hard part. So take proof. I'm not making up these numbers that say that initiatives fail. They fail. Call other executives. Read a book about why it's going to fail. Talk to a change person and see about how you can think about it. Again, don't try to, take more than you can chew either.
Mm-hmm.
Find small things, do pilot programs, right? Find stakeholders who are excited about what you want to do. Let them be your champions. Be very clear about what your vision is going to be here. And all these nuances can go along. Understand the impact to your stakeholders. Don't be afraid. It's okay to fail and admit failure. Hey, we made a mistake, or, we know we told you it was going to be a go live date of July 1, but we're going to be September. And here's why. And in doing this, we're going to make sure that the systems are ready. Our people are well trained. They understand how this is going to work. And we want to invest in you and making sure that takes place. And change management goes a long way in helping, change management should make an executive's life easier, not harder, right? We should be making people feel and connected to that initiative and program. And that goes a long way towards the adoption, I think. I hope.
Well, the proof is in the pudding.
Right. If you like pudding. Yeah.
I do.
You too.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. This has given me hope. And next time I do a big project, I will be thinking about all of this.
That's what we want, right? I say at the table. I think it's very, very important for just to be part of that dialogue and recognize that implementing technology alone, changing a process alone, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really want benefit, you really need to understand how those things work. Ask people, get their voice, and it might be, you might be facilitating complaint sessions. Let it get out. It's okay. It's okay. You can't change the history of what's happened in an organization. You can learn from it and say, hey, we're not going to make that mistake. We need to take this information and build upon it.
Well, people are the heart of successful change.
So this is what I'm told.
Yes.
Right.
So we're going to put the link for how you can find Scott in the description and Anthros Partners. And I appreciate you coming on in December and sharing some gold with us.
Change management goodness. Yeah.
Yes.
It's my pleasure. It's been great to be a part of the discussion here.
Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
See you soon. Take care.